Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Monica Ruiz, and I'm the Executive Director of Casa San Jose. And today we're going to be talking about how during the pandemic, we were able to come together across cultures to help one another during a time of crisis. So I will be the moderator today, and with me I have my panel, and I'll start from the end and come down, and then so Larry Meadows, who is with the Iota Phi Foundation. Do you want to go ahead and
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I am with the Iota Phi Foundation. I'm the vice chairman. We are the fundraising partner for Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, the Iota Phi chapter in Pittsburgh. We do a series of events locally, and we partner with as many organizations as we can to do services in the community. And I'll give more details about what we did during COVID during the discussion. So it's nice to be here.
Noah. Do you want to go ahead?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noah Terrio. My day job, I'm an anthropologist, and I teach at Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh. But the main reason I'm here today is as a volunteer for Casa San Jose. And I just wanted to shout out, Monica, thank you so much for the invitation, but also Veronica Jenkins, who couldn't be here today with us, but who I think had a hand in it. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Antonia.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Antonia Domingo. I'm here with APALA, which stands for the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. I am actually subbing in for our local chapter president, Sabrina Liu, who couldn't be here. What I'm about to talk about, Sabrina was much more involved in than I was, so I want to give her all of that credit. But I will do my best, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks. So, COVID hit. It hit the entire world, and I'm just going to describe a little bit of what it looked like here locally. So Pittsburgh is probably one of the least diverse major cities that we have in the United States, and so there are a lot of systems and structures that are set up that don't work very well or easy for folks that English might not be their first language. And so when COVID first hit, we knew that we would definitely see some barriers that maybe other communities didn't see. At Casa, we work primarily with recent arrivals from other countries, and so the vast majority of the people that we serve are undocumented. And so we knew right away that there wouldn't be, that our families didn't qualify for unemployment, and that they wouldn't be receiving stimulus checks. And because of the fact that they're recent arrivals, there really was no safety net set up for them. And so Casa did what we, I think, do best, and we really were able to pivot to make sure that the immediate needs were being met for everyone that we served, and not just here in Pittsburgh or Allegheny County. We were able to serve the surrounding counties as well. So right now, again, since Pittsburgh is not as diverse as I think it should be, the Latino population is only 3% of the population, which is still an 80% growth within the last 10 years. So that is, we are a population that are growing very fast. But again, there was, it was probably a really difficult time to realize how much Pittsburgh is really behind when, during a pandemic when so many people needed services. So of course, we had to reach out to, our neighbors, whether it was like our American-born neighbors, our African-American brothers and sisters, or our brothers and sisters from the AAPI community. And so I'll let everyone kind of talk about like the role that they played, and then I'll kind of tie it in at the end. So we started there, so we'll start here with Antonia. Is that okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay,
Thanks,
good.
Monica. Okay, so APALA, or again, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, we are primarily a workers' rights organization. So we are supported by the AFL-CIO, and there's chapters all over the country. We started our Pittsburgh chapter in 2019, so not long before the pandemic started. And, initially, we focused on supporting union organizing campaigns, especially a lot with language access issues. And we also did Know Your Rights campaigns primarily with undocumented workers on immigration issues, wage and hour issues, that kind of thing. So that's where we were coming from. And, you know, like everybody on this panel, none of us were prepared or had any sort of expertise in how to respond to a global pandemic. So, you know, when COVID hit, we had already, you know, we're a fairly young organization, but we knew we weren't going to get far with reaching out to other organizations in our community. So we'd been working closely with CASA from the beginning. They'd been incredibly helpful and supportive and encouraging of us as we started our organization. And also with our sister organization in the labor movement, LACLA, which stands for, let's see if I can get this right, Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. So all of us had been working together on immigration and wage issues. So COVID hit, you know, it hit the AAPI community in ways like it hit everybody. And then in addition to that, as I'm sure you all remember, COVID was being referred to as the China virus. There was a lot of anti-Asian racism at the time. So, you know, people, our members, were facing kind of, you know, street harassment, racism on a daily basis, sort of on top of not being able to work and food insecurity and the other things that were happening. So CASA was doing what they do best, organizing within their community, responding to needs as they come up, and they reached out to us sort of with two issues. The first one was Monica contacted Sabrina, our local chapter president, and said, you know, hey, we've got some money to distribute to people who need it. We don't have ties to the AAPI community. Would you guys be able to help with that? And so, you know, what we did, primarily through Sabrina, is reach out through our contacts. As a labor organization, a workers' rights organization, we had been working closely with the graduate student workers who are trying to organize a union with United Steelworkers at the University of Pittsburgh. So we reached out to their student organizing committee. A lot of graduate student workers are AAPI and had lost their funding or their job during the COVID pandemic. So we reached out through them to let them know that we had funds available for people who wouldn't be eligible for stimulus money. So that would be, you know, people with certain kinds of immigration status and undocumented folks. And we also have a long-running partnership with the Restaurant Opportunity Center, and a lot of undocumented restaurant workers in Pittsburgh are AAPI. So we tried to reach them through just, you know, posting flyers on like physical bulletin boards where they might see them, and also through social media and through various apps that restaurant workers use. So through that, people would apply for the funding, and we were able to distribute, you know, thanks to CASA again for like alerting to this, right around $70,000 to about 100 families. So we did that. The second thing was getting people vaccinations. So if anybody was eligible for that first round of vaccines, or you were trying to help family get that first round of vaccines, you probably remember how incredibly confusing that was. So, you know I can speak for myself. I am a native English speaker. I was able to work from home. I still had a job. You know, I know how to, you know, use a smartphone and the internet. And I did fall in to a high-risk category at the time, and I could not navigate these systems. So, you know, you can just imagine how difficult it was for people who sort of didn't have those resources. So UPMC, and then I think later Allegheny Health Network as well, had both reached out to Monica and said, you know, we want to set aside vaccination spots for people who might not be able to access these systems because of language, because of economic resources, what have you. And again, CASA reached out to us and said, you know, we don't have ties to the AAPI community, and we imagine there are people who need these spots as well. So using a lot of the same networks, we tried to make those spots, publicize that we had spots available. You know, we dealt with a lot of people who were struggling to use the registration systems because of language issues, so we were, you know, able to help that way. Also a lot of elders who were struggling with the technology, and just people who, I mean, you guys, I think, probably remember what that was like. So kind of with that communication and with that help, we were able to register, I think, right around 1,000 people for spots to get vaccinated. So I will stop there, and Monica,
Thanks.
go on.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, we, kind of going along with what Anthony was saying, we had distribution days, so we knew that a lot of the folks were underbanked, and so we would actually give cash. So what we would do is we would ask people to come, you know, we'd have 20 slots every Saturday, and people would hear a workers' right, Know Your Rights worker session from the chapter president, Guillermo Perez of LACLA. They'd speak to a doctor, a pediatrician. We would distribute food, we would distribute cleaning supplies, and people would fill out the census. And then I was like the little cheese at the end of the maze, where once you went through all those steps, then you got your money in cash. And I wanted to make sure that when, you know, CASA was able to raise $1 million during this time, and so that's why we were able to help so many people. And every time I would ask for money, I would say, you know, I don't want like, the requirements, you have to get rid of these requirements, because if I write people a check, they're gonna go and pay $20 down the street to get it cashed, or might not even be able to get it cashed, and many of them don't have bank accounts. And so, you know, having to really push foundations and organizations to think outside the box so that we really were meeting the needs of people. And so that was, you know, us trying to meet the like larger needs, but there were some very specific needs that also were needed to be met. And I think that's where NOAA really played a major role in that. So Noah, go ahead and let us talk about what you did.
Thank you, and I want to commend you for all the amazing work that you and your colleagues did during that time. Thank you for sharing.
Same. Yeah.
So I have been a volunteer at CASA since, I think, 2018, and so there's kind of a before times and a pandemic times to that story, but I'll just focus on the latter. When the pandemic hit, I was fortunate to be on sabbatical, so I was able to give a lot of time to CASA, and I was really, really, really impressed at the time by how quickly the organization pivoted to continue providing its services either virtually or in person in a safe way, but also just took on a bunch of new things that they hadn't been doing before. And over time, I think either expanding and really doing those things, or shifting back to where those things are done by the organizations that specialize in it, like a food bank or something like this. But initially I'll just give a few examples of the things I helped with, just so that there's a sense of the broad spectrum of things that CASA was doing. So Monica mentioned these clinics, in essence, that were set up to accomplish all of those things. And I was usually involved in the food part of that. Veronica, who I mentioned, set up an emergency food pantry that took in all kinds of donations. Then we had to set up an inventory system. Then we started getting boxes of fresh produce from farmers to families, which we would give out, but also had to deliver a lot of those. So we were driving all over the city, mostly in the suburbs, to deliver those foods. And you know, that's just really one piece of it. A lot of the emergency response stuff, like accompanying people to CIS or court, continued to happen, especially in the early days of the pandemic, oftentimes in very stressful conditions where the courts hadn't yet implemented social distancing or masking policies. And then there was things like Laura had me FOIA-ing all of the police departments in Allegheny County at one point, which if you know Laura, you wouldn't be surprised. So there was all kinds of stuff going on at CASA. The one thing that I wanted to talk about in a little bit more depth, though, today was helping sign CASA families up for Comcast internet. So many of the families, for obvious reasons, did not have internet access in their homes prior to the pandemic, or some of them did and then canceled it when they lost their jobs, or shared it with people but then needed better bandwidth because their children needed to go to school online. You can imagine all of the different reasons. It became even more of a day-to-day life or death necessity, having internet access in your home at that point. And Comcast, to some extent to their credit, although they were forced to do this by the federal government when they merged with whoever, Universal, whoever it was they merged with, they had to provide this service as like a concession to get through the antitrust regulators. And so it's essentially a subsidized $10 a month internet plan for low-income households. And you have to be a new Comcast customer, meaning you can't have had it, I think, within the last 6 months. If I screw up any of these details, I'm sorry, it's been a while. But basically, it's meant to bring new people into Comcast services who haven't had them before. And that sounds great, but and they actually made it free for new families at the start of the pandemic, which was also a good thing to do. But signing people up for that was one of the most challenging, nightmarish experiences that I've ever had in my life. They were totally overwhelmed by demand, which to some extent is understandable. However, they have a separate parallel customer service system for people who go through Internet Essentials rather than through the standard Comcast service. So you had to wait on the phone on hold for literally hours to get to talk to somebody. And it was almost impossible to get an application through successfully without talking to someone. And sometimes even when you could talk to someone, it was impossible. So for a single family, especially in the beginning before I learned some of the tricks of this, every single application I was putting in was failing or being rejected. And I would have to get the confirmation number or whatever it was, wait on hold for hours, and then talk to somebody who half the time wouldn't be able to solve the problem. And they would refuse to deal directly with me because I wasn't the name on the account, so I would have to somehow get the head of the household that I was trying to sign up to be on the call three-way, but people couldn't make 3 hours out of their busy lives to sit on hold for obvious reasons. So it created all these logistical hurdles. They did have bilingual customer service to their credit in that sense, so I was able to send some people to call on their own, but people were often intimidated by that because they were new to this country, they were new to navigating these kinds of systems, and also they got asked a lot of questions that I think you wonder about the intention behind them. And I think in this case, Comcast was trying to just verify eligibility rather than do any other kind of checking of people. But when someone's asking you, do you qualify for this long list of government acronyms, you're like, I don't know how much I want to get into sharing and disclosing this stuff. So it was very complicated. One of the issues in the beginning, which in retrospect is still shocking to me, it would reject any compound surnames, whether they had a hyphen or no hyphen. And so you can imagine for the Latinx community, that's almost everybody. And so then it was like, well, which one do we use? And they would say, well, usually it's this one, so we'd end up going that way. But then if they already had something in the Comcast system and it didn't match, it could be a problem. So on and on. A lot of people who had canceled their service because they had lost their jobs then weren't eligible for this and either had to go back on the prior service they had that was expensive, or figure out some other alternative. Eventually, the Carnegie Public Library system started giving out free hotspots, so you were able to triage people whose situations didn't qualify for this and match them up with other things. PPS, where Larry worked at the time, was providing free Internet Essentials for all of its families, and that was bypassing some of these restrictions as well. But some of the families didn't live in PPS or didn't have children in the district, but still needed internet. And it would take sometimes weeks from beginning to end with one household to figure out how they were going to get access to the internet. And I was lucky that I had time as a volunteer at that moment. I don't know that CASA would have had capacity otherwise because everything was being stretched so thin. Mm-hmm. And as Monica said, in Pittsburgh, there aren't a lot of bilingual Spanish-English services, particularly ones that are set up to not only serve that, but to know, I guess, the challenges that low-income and especially low-income undocumented people face. I feel like because Pittsburgh has so little of that population historically, there's just a lot of collective ignorance about how, and perhaps prejudice as well. Sometimes, for example, families would have to go pick up their what do you call those things, like modems or whatever, their hotspots that Comcast would send. They wouldn't send it to certain addresses. The people would have to go pick them up from Ace Hardware, weirdly. And there were instances where the places would refuse to take their international passports, even though Comcast took that as an acceptable form of ID. So some random clerk at Ace Hardware was determining whether or not this person would be able to set up their internet. And that luckily wasn't like a systemic issue with this, but it's a piece of a larger systemic issue, and it just made each and every one of these things a potential like labyrinth of challenges that you had to figure out. And I think for me, it reinforced two bigger problems in our society, because I don't think this is a unique situation to this. One is having systems, social systems that are systematically discriminatory for low-income people, for communities of color, for non-English speaking communities. All the other forms of structural inequality play out through those systems. And I think it becomes especially severe when, but not uniquely, when those systems are being then taken over essentially by private corporations that are offering them at a profit incentive, and when they do offer them for some kind of a discount, when they're forced to in this case, I would say, they don't provide the same quality of service, and they don't make it easy to access, which of course we know the government doesn't always do either of those two things either, but the accountability mechanisms are a bit different, I would say, in those cases. So to me, internet should be a human right at this point. It should be available just as easily as and inexpensively as water, which we know, especially in Pittsburgh, isn't always the case. But I think we should put it into the hierarchy of needs a lot higher up maybe than it is, and treat it like a utility that gets regulated as such, rather than a private for-profit thing that is a commodity essentially. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Noah. And you made a really good point. We didn't have the capacity at that time. So had it not been for someone that had the ability to dedicate so much time, because this wasn't like, oh, I'll help you out for 5 hours on Monday and then I'll see you next week. This was like a full-time job for Noah for a very long time. And so, but had you not had that dedication to help our families, so many people would not have had internet. So thank you, and they still wouldn't. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So internet obviously was something that was really, really important at that time, but so was food, right? And so GASA kind of, we talked a little bit about it. We turned into a food pantry, which is something that we never thought we would do. We didn't think we would know what we were doing, but thank God for Veronica, because she really, she had experience working with food pantries in the past, and she brought all of that knowledge to help us establish one at GASA. One of the other things that we did is we partnered with another volunteer who, he was a doctor, he's a hand surgeon, and he said, hey, listen, I'm gonna get all my friends to donate all this money, but I want to help restaurants stay in business. And so we called it triple play. And so what we did was he got his friends to donate money. We used that money to buy food at restaurants at a very, very, very discounted rate so that they could continue to pay their employees. And then we donated that food to our community members. And so it was amazing. It was different restaurants, really great food, hot meals, which were really important during that time as well. And so that was another way on how we were able to kind of collaborate with other communities that we kind of hadn't collaborated with in the past. But the other thing is that then we worked with the Iota Phi Foundation. So Larry, go ahead and you can talk a little bit about what you guys did.
So the Iota Phi Foundation, we're an organization of college-educated African-American men. Most of our members are from the Pittsburgh area, but we have several that move into Pittsburgh. Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated is an international fraternity. So when COVID hit, we realized that many of the community members that we helped, especially the elders, could not get out. They could not get food in a safe manner. And many of those elders were like family members of, the members of our organization. So we started working with our partners. And COVID forced us to really say, who's in our network, who has access to what services, and how can we get those services out? We have about just under 100 members. So we said everybody has a car, you have transportation, and if you're young enough and healthy enough, because we do have members in their 90s, if you're young enough and healthy enough, we need you to help us distribute food. So we reached out to our food partners, we reached out to our collective partners. I served a double role, as Noah mentioned. I worked for Pittsburgh Public Schools at the time. I was also serving as the vice chairman. So while I was helping Noah with the internet, And after 5, I would kind of coordinate food distribution, and we had to find out who could get us food. And opposite to the internet part, the food only lasts for like a day or two when you get it in that bulk package. So we had to get the food. We had to figure out how to prepare the food. So we established partnerships with local churches who allowed us access to their kitchens. And we established partnerships with local chefs who agreed to come in and cook the food. The distribution was on us. So once we got that up and running, we got donations, we got more and more food, and all of a sudden, we kind of had like a excess. So we were like, well, we don't want this food to go to waste. What other organizations do we know that might also experience this? So COVID really opened our eyes up to shared like problems in our communities. The elders in every community had transportation issues, and they had issues getting out to get food. And what we found out was the trust that we had built in the community really went a long way. When we told our elders, you know, we have food, we'll bring it to you, they weren't even hesitant. They were like, we trust you guys are wearing food, like gloves when you prepare the food, right? And we were like, of course we are. So when we got enough food, we reached out to CASA, we reached out to several other organizations, and we said, hey, how much food do you guys need? Because we gave out prepared meals. We would actually form like a assembly line. And, you know, I would do the macaroni and cheese, and somebody else would do the chicken, and somebody else would do the veggies, and we box them up and send them out. So it really made us look within our organization and say, who has contacts in the community, who has the ability to move the food, who knows the chefs, who has connections at the churches. And it really kind of expanded like the way we thought. We were a very, this is our neighborhood, these are the children that we serve. We mostly serve like teenagers and young people, and we help them with their development, academics and everything. But we had access to all of the families because many of our members are from here, and they know the families. So we knew exactly what the community needed. But we did not know that communities in other parts of the city were going through the same thing. And COVID really helped us realize that this is not an African-American community thing. It's not a Spanish-speaking community thing. It's not a Nepali thing. This is like a Pittsburgh thing. Mm-hmm. Like, people need help, and if we have the ability to help them out, like, let's get this food out here and make sure people have hot meals. So it was a really good experience for us, and it changed the way we thought at the decision-making level in our organization in terms of when we plan an event, like, it doesn't have to be an emergency, and it doesn't have to be like people needing food. If we do something with the teenagers, like, why don't we invite people from other communities? You know, if we do some academic stuff, why don't we invite people from other communities? And I'm originally from Washington, D.C., so when I came to Pittsburgh, I learned the dynamics of Pittsburgh. I learned the neighborhoods. There's a saying that people don't cross bridges in Pittsburgh, which was very confusing to me. I understand it now. But it was a good learning moment for me in terms of we saw kind of from a different perspective when COVID hit. It was like there were so many problems that needed to be addressed, and we were like, which ones can we really focus on? And food and distribution and coordinating that whole process of getting the food and getting into the hands of the family, it really kind of like put us at a different level. And you know, we just operate our organization totally different now. And you know, we've continued to partner with CASA. We have a cross-cultural program about to start next month, and it's for teenagers. It's an experience thing. We're going to focus on positive identity development, and a lot of that comes from the experience we had through COVID. So as bad as this pandemic has been, it actually has provided opportunities for us to actually reach across communities and across bridges. So
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Kind of on that, so like, can you all just tell me why, you know, because Pittsburgh is really segregated, and it really is difficult to, you know, go into neighborhoods. Like, they ask you, like, what high school did you go to? I'm like, you know, I'm about to be 50 years old soon. Who cares what high school I went to, right? So, but here it's a thing. It's a thing, and if you're not, from the certain neighborhood or attended a certain school, it's like you're really even more of an outsider. And so, I mean, for me, I've been in Pittsburgh for 14 years. I'm raising my children here. I'm, developing a life here. I do like it here as much as I've just complained about it. But, and it's important to me, though, that we have these experiences with people with other cultures and learning from one another and not just listening to like the dominant narrative that says that XYZ community is bad. And so that's part of the reason why the work with the Iota Phi Foundation has started, and we're being really intentional. It's not like, oh, let's just put some teenagers together and see what happens. No, we're really being intentional on what we're trying to do here. We've done work with Latina moms and African American moms in the past too, which is also like, we are very different, but there are some things that are the same. And this is the first time that this has ever happened in this city. And it's 2022. It shouldn't have taken this long. But to me, it's really important to create a community, a city, Western Pennsylvania, where it's welcoming for all, where my kids aren't the only, right, at the school or at the whatever. Because, again, Pittsburgh's population is still steadily declining, and the only population that's growing here in this city is the immigrant population. And so, like, the folks that have been here for a long, long time who are like, we don't want you here. Too bad. We're here. We're here. Get over it, right? You're going to have to deal with it. And if you want a thriving city, that's how it's going to happen, right? So, to me, it's very, very important to create environments where people aren't just surviving but thriving, especially people that may not have been born in this country. So that's, part of the reason why I do the work. But I kind of wanted to hear a little bit about, what, like you all said, you all had to kind of step up for your own communities, but why was it so important during this time, and maybe some takeaways, and I'll start with you, Antonia.
Great, thank you. And it was so great to hear from Noah and Larry and all the work that they did, so thank you for sharing. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we were a young organization when this hit, and as I'm sure you all know, the AAPI community is extremely diverse, linguistically, ethnically. So a lot of what we were doing initially is trying to kind of, make connections within that community. But when COVID hit, it just became very clear how we needed to be working with other communities of color within Pittsburgh. We just couldn't do what we were trying to do on our own. I mean, I think it was clear that was impossible. So that was one big lesson. I think another lesson we took away is we talked as an organization about how we wanted to be doing the work of building a multiracial coalition of workers, but frankly, we weren't doing that work yet. And as I think I think Larry mentioned, the pandemic has been horrible, but there has been some silver linings, and one of those silver linings was the connections we started to make and the coalitions we started to build, and it did kind of push us to be like, no, this can't be a goal, we'll get to that next year, or we'll get to that once we've sort of addressed. No, this is critical to the work that we're doing, and we have to do it now. And I think one result of the pandemic is it really pushed us that we're not going to be able to do what we need to do unless we start working in coalition.
Thanks. Noah?
So I, as I mentioned, had already been volunteering for CASA, so in some ways it was natural that I would continue to do that during the pandemic, but I suppose for me, the reason why I really felt motivated was the same reasons I started volunteering in the first place, which is CASA, on the one hand, from my perspective, has a very high level of competence, and whether that's at navigating bureaucracy or providing emergency services, but they're also not depoliticized, like a lot of nonprofits are. I would see CASA at rallies that I would go to. I would see CASA, taking stands on issues that I care about, going to the Capitol to make noise about important legislation, things that you don't always see from nonprofits. And so for me, that was a big draw because I didn't feel like I would have to leave that side of my motivation aside in order to be useful there. And I think in addition to that, I grew up in southern Arizona, and so for me, being in community with people whose families have roots in that region for much, much, much longer than mine, many of whom are even indigenous, but who are considered immigrants because of the arbitrary line of the border, being in community with those communities, for me was something I very much missed. And so having recently moved to Pittsburgh, I was just looking to kind of broaden my own horizons here, and was surprised on the one hand to find that there wasn't a larger community than there was, but also the extent to which it was being made invisible, I think, by narratives that focus so much on certain aspects of Pittsburgh and leave out others. And CASA, I think, has done a really good job challenging that, and to have played even a small part of that for me has been really an honor.
Thanks. Larry?
What was the question again?
What did it mean to you to do the work that you did? Why did you do it? And what do you think,
Okay.
some lessons learned?
So I got my understanding of the Pittsburgh community through, I was the coordinator for family, youth, and community engagement for Pittsburgh Public Schools, which gave me access to all of the families within the entire school district. And Pittsburgh Public Schools, when I was there, I believe they had representatives from 96 countries, 56 countries that spoke 96 different languages. So I knew that there were a lot of people who had to deal with language barriers. My efforts to get what I was doing out, it was so relationship heavy. I would say, hey, I can come out and I can speak to your group. And people would kind of be like, well, who are you exactly? And I was like, well, I'm with Pittsburgh Public Schools. And they would be like, yeah, but who are you really? So I went to, I remember I went to a Latino Family Center meeting a couple of years ago. And I saw somebody that I knew, and they were like, well, what are you doing here? And I was like, well, this is a community organization. Shouldn't I be here? And they weren't used to people coming to the meetings from outside of that community. Yep. So I made it a point to try to get into as many communities as I could and find out what their needs were. And if there were other organizations that held a meeting, I would say, please invite me. I just want to come and meet people and hear what you guys have to say. That was the beginning of it. My work with the Iota Phi Foundation, that was neighborhood specific. So we were initially in the East End. We recently got a new building on the north side at Anderson Manor. So we have a different population down there, which are still African-American community, but as I said before, the neighborhoods you serve, they're very different. Mm-hmm. So our brothers who grew up on the north side had to really step up and say, we're in the neighborhood, we want to help now. Mm-hmm. So when COVID hit, I took all of these relationships I had built, all the relationships, all of the people I knew, and I was really just trying to figure out what everybody needed. And once we got the food, it was like, this is something that I'm good at. I'm a good relationship person. I'm good at talking to people. I can code switch when I need to, and it really gave me the opportunity to talk to people in the community, in different communities. While I was at school, with families were there, I would be like, well, how are you all doing? How is your community? What do you need? And it was one of those things where I took my strength and I really used it for the advantage of the community. So that was really why I did it. I saw people who needed help. I took my skill of building relationships, and I was like, this is something I could use to really help Pittsburgh overall by just connecting different people. Even if I couldn't do something specifically, I could reach out and say, I know somebody from the Hill District, I know somebody from the North Side, I know somebody from, where's Casa at? The neighborhood? Beachview. I don't know all of the neighborhoods. I'm still kind of new. But I knew that there were different neighborhoods and communities that had needs. And I was like, this is something that I can do. So I was like, let me use my skill set to really try to make a difference. So that was why I got involved.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really glad, obviously, that everybody kind of got involved at that time. And I think Antonia really made a good point of how none of us were going to do this by ourselves. The need was just so grand, and there was no way, there was no way, that was going to happen. Casa went from serving, I think it was about 400 families prior to COVID per year, and now we're at about 4,000. And so, did all of those families move to Pittsburgh during COVID? No. But the need was different. The need changed. And kind of like what Noah said, we were able to pivot very quickly to make sure that we met the needs. And a lot of it was relationship building, right? So how do you tell a big foundation, thank you for the grant that you just gave us to do this thing, but now this other huge thing has just happened. Do you trust us enough to just switch, X amount of dollars to go somewhere else, because that's what we're seeing. And so, some were easier to convince than others. But it is the relationship and kind of like the work that we had been steadily doing, which I think we do very, very well in the community for quite some time. And so, that has led us to build other relationships. We're here, when I first got introduced in Netroots, it wasn't too long ago, but and a lot of what we talked, the initial conversation was about the work that we did during COVID. And I'd like to say that, we did the best that we could at that time, and I'm hoping that if and when the next situation comes where such intense need, help is needed rather, that we'd be able to pivot and provide assistance at that time. So, I just wanted to share this with you all because, maybe you all already have this kind of cross-cultural collaboration in your cities, and so, we're trying to be more like those cities, or maybe there are some cities that don't have it yet, and so this is really, really important to do, and it's, I come from a more diverse city, and it was already there when I got there, but here you have to do a lot of intentional work to make it happen, and we have to stop thinking about I live in this part of the city where I have to cross, to get from the East End to get to the South Hills, you've got to cross, 2, maybe 3 bridges, go through 2, maybe 3 tunnels, and so it's real, but we're all trying to make this a better place, and we're not going to do it if we're not crossing those bridges or building or in those tunnels. So I think I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Yeah, I'll be quiet. Annie? Uh-huh.
So, I can really speak from my side of things, with being Hispanic.
Give me a second, Annie. Uh-huh.
Okay. The older panel has given us microphones. So, like I said, I can only speak from our side of things. We're being Hispanic, being Latina. I can only speak for my community specifically. But do you think that 400 to 4,000 really systemic from that kind of machismo attitude where you don't want to ask for help, you stay within your own community and yeah, you immigrated here and your neighbors the kind of your only support system? Do you think that a lot of that came from that and that just not knowing how to ask for help because you just don't in our culture?
Yeah. So prior to COVID, the vast majority of the volunteers at CASA were American. Vast majority. And you're right. People were like, no, I'm good, whatever. And it was minor things. When COVID hit, and I remember this, where our community lost their jobs because the vast majority of the folks that live here are working either in the hospitality industry or in the construction industry, which, restaurants closed. So these people did not know where their next meals were coming from. Those were the people delivering the food. Those were the people that were coming to Casa every day listen, I literally don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. I don't know anything right now, but I know that there are people that need me, and I'm here. So some of that kind of got swept to the side because people had children. And so that machismo that our Latino brothers have kind of got pushed to the wayside because their children were at stake. So yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
Is this even on?
Mm-mm.
I talk loud, it's fine.
It's not.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So I come from like a bicultural background, but given my appearance and how I interact and everything, I feel very Ecuadorian American. And I went to college in Southern Virginia, and at my school, like there were only white and black people, and like very few Latinos, very few Asian, like no native people, and I found myself very challenged because I was like, well, I feel very looked at, side-eyed, mean mugged by the white people. But like the black people, like were cool. I had more in common, so I ended up more in black spaces, black like parties and like environments, and like I was called white girl for the first time, and that was pretty cool. I was like, wow, white girl. It was intimidating because I was like, I don't know how white girls are supposed to act, but I guess I'm white girl here. That's interesting. And then I experienced what it feels like to be a white person in a black space, and became aware of my white privilege. And yeah, so I guess my question is for all of you when it comes to like cross-cultural like collaborations, and I would say I'm pretty expert in this already, but obviously you guys are more experts, more experienced, but I felt a lot of hostility sometimes in environments where I had to just bring mad love. Because I was like, they hate me because of what white people do to these communities. And they just see white and they have no idea that like Latinos also face like, but me personally, yeah, no, it's still, intersectional. So yeah, like what advice like do you all have like individually, like coming from your community where we all have stereotypes, we all get like backlash, we all get like we might have good intentions, but we might not be receiving positive interactions because people just like have a lot of prejudice despite so, and also you have to work on your own prejudice too, right? It's like, okay, don't take it personally. Like people really feel this like feeling towards you for real reasons, for real trauma that they live their whole life and every day. So, yeah.
I'll take a step really quick, and then I'm going to reference to a conversation that we had yesterday, right? Okay, so.
I'll go after you.
Yeah, okay. So number one, thank you. And number two, I grew up, same thing. I lived in an environment that was really, really white, and then in high school I got to go to, it was an all-black high school. I never felt so much love than I did when I was there. It was really different. It was really, really different. And then I moved here. And so, like, I get here, and it's like, oh, man, like, all these people, like, go back to where you came from, blah, 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 whatever, whatever. It's all the white people. I'm like, whatever. But the first time that a black man told me to go back to where I came from, I was like, no, this is not what we're doing here, right? And so, like, after conversations, and of course, you've got, like, Pittsburgh, there's not a lot of diversity here, right? So you've never seen anybody that looks like me. You've never met anyone who speaks a different language. And just, like, having these conversations about, like, I'm not here to steal your job. I'm not here to kidnap your baby. Like, all these stupid things that people hear on the news, right? So I think that's why I've been so intentional since I got here, and I've been working within the schools about sharing space with people that don't look like you. It's so important because we have to provide that space. We have to learn from one another because guess what? Like, I'm having kids, other people are having kids. These kids are going to have to interact eventually with each other, and I want them to be prepared. And they can't go into these schools or playgrounds or whatever it is with these like notions of like who's bad and who's good, because there are populations in this country that do a really good job at making us look like terrible people, and so we have to do intentional hard work to make sure that that's not what's happening. But I'm going to let Larry talk. We had a conversation really similar to this yesterday, so go ahead, Larry.
So from a strategy perspective, the categorization and the separation of like oppressed people, like African Americans, Spanish speaking communities, Asian communities, Nepali communities, anybody who is like non-traditional white, they are discriminated against and oppressed. And one of the most impressive strategies I've seen is just the divide and conquer. It is implemented within the black community, which I said before, like certain neighborhoods just don't mess with each other. Black and Latino, Latina, Latinx, all three terms. I don't want to get in trouble. But the separation is intentional. The media does it, and we have to intentionally, and this is what we're going to do through our program, We have to intentionally teach our young people that when you grow up, the media is gonna have images and stories. They're gonna put black men in handcuffs, and they're gonna show brown people getting, deported or sent back over the border, or arrested by Border Patrol. They're gonna show you these images intentionally to attack your confidence. And in America, I've seen it so much. I grew up in DC, I lived in New York, and when I came to Pittsburgh, the separation was so intense. And I was like, this divide and conquer strategy has worked wonderfully in Pittsburgh. I go anywhere I want. I'll go to the north side. I'll go to bars on the north side, bars downtown, anywhere. And I'm like, hey, why don't you guys come to this other spot? And they're like, we don't mess with them. And I'm like, based on what? And they're like, because they're from here. And I'm like, well, and then I'm like, okay, this is like taught. So it is something that we have to intentionally attack and say, we cannot allow the media and society to like further segregate us and keep us separated and say, well, I'm black and we need this money from this organization, so now we don't like the Spanish-speaking organization because they're going for the same money, and we're definitely not gonna work with the Asian community or the Nepali community or anybody because we need this money.
Right. Yep.
And the structure of Pittsburgh is set up to where you have a lot of nonprofits fighting for a little bit of money. So we have to do better at fighting that narrative where it's like, you guys should fight against them because if you get the money, they won't get it, or if they get the money, you won't get it. We have to fight against that and say we have to work together because we're all oppressed populations at the end of the day, and it only benefits like the white power structure if we fight against each other and if we don't work with each other. Nothing will ever change if we don't get past that and say we have to start from birth to adulthood and train our people that there are messages out there that we will have to intentionally ignore and teach our children differently. And if we don't do that, this cycle is gonna continue. Somebody's gonna get a little bit of money, they're gonna keep picking off the academic achievers and say, well, let's put you in a gifted program. And now you're gonna learn more about our culture versus your culture. And there's all these separation tactics. So I've been through the same thing. I'm a light-skinned African-American. I was called white I don't know how many times. Chased around the playground as a kid. I'm like, get out of here, white boy. And I'm like, but I'm black. But it was one of those things where now I understand what's going on. I'm like, you do realize, like, we're helping.
That's right.
Like, if we keep fighting against each other, we're helping the people that are oppressing us. They don't have to do anything anymore. They have to just sit back and watch us and say, look at them fighting amongst each other. Good job, whoever came up with that strategy. It's working perfectly. So it drives me crazy. It's one of my things that I'm going back to school in a couple of days to get my doctorate in education to try to work on positive identity development because I think that is at the root of all of the separation and all of the fighting and all of the misinterpretations and misunderstandings. If our kids understand that they're being fed this stuff on purpose so they won't work together, I think we can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was amazing.
Hope I didn't get too passionate.
No,
right there.
That was a toned down version from yesterday, so yeah, that was good.
I was working to turn it down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just wanted, that was great, Larry, and also from what you said, Monica, and a great question. And I just wanted to sort of, from the AAPI community perspective, I think there's a lot there from what Larry was talking about, like dividing us and it being like an intentional strategy. So specifically, there are people like way smarter than me who have like written about this and talked about this, but the model minority myth among the API community is, I think, a prime example of like trying to divide us from other communities. And I'll just say, the model minority is never applied to everybody within the AAPI community. It's been selective within that community. So like, racism and discrimination among communities and, in addition to among others. But that in a lot of ways just serves to, make AAPI people, sort of try and have them more identify with white communities where they're, not actually being treated as white, but so that they're not making connections with Latinx communities and Black communities. So that is certainly a problem. The other thing, right after the Atlanta shootings, Apollo was asked to do all kinds of things, and we were basically like, no, we're like, we just, we don't really have the emotional capacity to do much right now. But, some other organizations, and I'm, certainly not going to name them, but came out with statements about really aligning themselves with the police and how, we believe in law and order, we really want to align with the police. And there's some like thinly veiled anti-Black racism there, which has, been an issue for a lot of our communities for a long time. So like that's another thing that we need to address and think through. And then finally, just, personally, my mom's white, I'm half white, I'm a very white passing Asian person. So a lot of what I was saying about, a lot of the racism that people in our community faced, especially during the pandemic, that is not something that I personally had to deal with. So I do just want to acknowledge that. And I think it's always good to be, cognizant and self-reflective of the privilege that we have.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Is there time still?
Yep.
Great. So all three of those responses said way more than I could possibly ever say. So I'll try to keep this really brief. But I think from my perspective, to answer this really great provocation would be two parts. Well, on the one hand, challenge the narrative, which I think is a little bit about what you were just talking about. And as an educator, I start with educating myself, and then I build into my curriculum explicitly local history and local voices that challenge this idea of Pittsburgh's like decline and renaissance, which you hear a lot, which really centers certain kinds of labor, certain communities, and certain sources of value in those communities, and really papers over how a lot of these supposed drivers of the Renaissance are extractive and harming a lot of the communities that they're depending on for labor. So challenging that narrative, bringing out, as Monica was saying, like the true dynamism of Pittsburgh and what is really driving growth in this region, which is tends to be low-income immigrants who do a lot of low-paid wage labor. And then related to that, I would say organizing, and in particular unionizing. It would be amazing to see what's happening here accelerate more, including places like Starbucks, but especially UPMC. And for those who aren't from Pittsburgh, it's this massive hospital conglomerate that masquerades as a nonprofit, but is extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, and pays very, very bad wages to a vast majority, especially its workers from minoritized communities. And so seeing those workers organize, I think, would potentially drive this kind of change that we're talking about.
Thanks. So, go ahead. We've got 1 minute.
Okay. I'm working with a coalition in New York that is, obviously, we're a very diverse city, and a lot of the groups work with really specific communities, cultural communities. And right now, it's part of a C3 GOTV effort, but the hope is to help support some relationships being built along the way. I'm curious for you all, what does maintenance of this coalition look like now that you're not in like rapid response mode, presumably? And like, what's next? Like, where are y'all headed?
Yeah, so I think that, that's a great question. I think the maybe not benefit, I guess, I don't know if we call this benefit, is that Pittsburgh's so small, and there's so few of us doing this work. And so, like, the work that I've done with Apala and Steelwork and Antonia personally and professionally is just, like, we've done so much work, so that will absolutely continue. The work that we're doing with the Iota Phi Foundation as well, that's kind of like what sparked it, and now we're being funded to do some other work. And so I think that money, like this, we all need to get paid to do this work. And so, like, we have to stop operating, like, especially 501c3. I run a 501c3. We have to stop operating with like this sense of scarcity, which I think is what Larry was saying, because there is plenty of money to do this work. And if we work together, we will get that money. So funding projects, being intentional. We're part of a statewide coalition, the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition. They do a great job of convening us periodically, actually not, well, prior to COVID, I guess. But, just really, it's intentional work. It's intentional work. You have to want to do this. You got to have some skin in the game, which I think that we all do. And so, yeah, I'll be quiet, but if anybody else wants to say something.
I just wanted to add really quick, once the relationships are formed, I can't even count how many people Monica has connected me to. I'll say, I'm trying to do this, and she's like, oh, do you know this person? So now that our organizations are connected, the chairman of our organization, Dr. Ramon Hart, also works for Rivers Casino. He does their community engagement work also. So he uses his relationships to link me up with people. Monica connects me with people. So once you get that network going, and it benefits because Pittsburgh is so small, that once you get connected to the right people, it's really easy to like kind of reach into different communities. You just have to be intentional about it. So, and just last thing before I go, my organization is having events over Labor Day weekend. If y'all want to really get our communities together, come on out and party with us. We have a community day on Saturday from 11 to 4 over at Anderson Manor. And it's a free event, so all are welcome. And we have other events throughout the weekend, but you got to pay for those.
I'll be there on Saturday. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I think in organizing in general, like moving from kind of immediate needs, rapid response to like stronger, long-lasting coalition building, it's a challenge. We're figuring that out. So if you guys have ideas, come talk to me later. I'd love to hear them.
Similarly, I think I'll be a learner in this process more than a leader. But one thing I could provide, I guess, is labor. And then since I have like some professional skills as an anthropologist and educator, perhaps bringing some skills to the table. But I think labor is an important thing to be able to provide and to follow the lead of others.
Yeah, well, that's it. Thank you so much for coming and joining us on our live stream. And we'll be here, for a little while if anybody else has any other questions.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.